healthcare, cloud, and AI community. We've tacked AI to the end at the end of our group here in the past 12 months. And so we're meeting in person here in the greater Boston area. And now just a couple quick sentences about our group, and then I want to dive right into the session that we have planned for today. And then we'll follow that up as normal with conversation and a little bit of a hack session with some of the modern AI stuff that we've talked about in previous sessions. So the Boston Healthcare Technology AI Cloud Group, based out of Greater Boston, our mission is pretty simple. It's essentially to try to get as many new people into the healthcare tech, clinical informatics space as possible. And so currently we do that by finding world-class speakers and giving them a stage, and then promoting that through channels like our Discord server, for example. So the group has made an investment in Discord because of the huge numbers of young folks that are on Discord. So it made sense for us when we were putting this community together to sort of go to where the people are, if you will. And so our mission is wrapped around that. We do have an advisory group if anybody's interested in joining. And it's actually a really good time because we're starting to do our event planning for the second part of the year, which will include our in-person full day event that we do here in the Burlington office. But also we're in the process of refining our mission statement and trying to come up with very concrete things that we can do even beyond the Discord server to get new folks into the space. And so with that said, that's a little bit of an introduction and why we're here. And for the folks in the Boston area and you're watching this, if you're thinking about whether you should come to the next meeting, so a couple of things you should know, just 3 simple things. Actually, I'll stick to 2. The 2 most important things we decided up front for this group is we want to 100% focus on great technology, world-class speakers, but also world-class sushi. So if you show up in person, you're welcome to join us for sushi snacks as well. And so, I don't want to show you the plate, but trust me, it's good stuff. So anyway, with that said, I'd like to turn it over to colleague and I'd like to say friend as well. I've known Bob for a very, very long time now, going back to I know exactly, to our days in the SharePoint community. And now Bob is, I'll actually let you do the introduction and talk about some of the newer stuff that you're working on. But great to have you here. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks. Yeah, well, I'm a cloud advocate, cloud developer advocate. So what that means is that my team helps people learn how to develop applications for, mainly it's been Microsoft Teams and Microsoft Graph, but also most recently Copilot extensibility. So taking Microsoft 365 Copilot and extending it. So it's, in a way, it's kind of my dream job because I get to make videos, and I mean, we're supposed to work at scale. So this is, speak at events, write documentation, build hands-on labs, write blog articles, make videos. And it's kind of like being an MVP, only you get paid.
Right.
This is great. Pinch me, I love it. So that's what I've been doing lately. And so actually, I wasn't sure about the audience, and I can be really flexible here because I actually have a couple of talks prepared. What I prepared for today is I sort of renewed and shortened a presentation that I had about governance for Teams applications. So if you have an app that extends Microsoft Teams, what I find is a lot of admins don't know what to do. So they just turn it all off. And then that's a blocker to people building apps and buying apps and selling apps.
Interesting.
They find out that the admins are nervous about it. They don't really understand it. And you imagine, right? You're suddenly handed the keys to Microsoft 365, and you're responsible if anything goes wrong.
Yeah.
Some security setting is wrong and the data leaks. Well, you're the one on the hot seat, right? And I get it. And then there's so many things. You've got to set up your email. You've got to set up the policies. Who can create teams? What's the information architecture? How does SharePoint work? What's your internet? Somewhere way down the list is these apps. And typically, we were chatting before, right? There seems to be two kind of stereotypically two types of orgs. There's the low governance ones where they just turn on Microsoft 365, take all the defaults and hope for the best. Tend to be smaller organizations. And then there's highly governed orgs where they are either larger or they're in highly regulated industries like healthcare. And, you know, only a few take the time to figure out how the app models work and be able to manage it. So I can talk about that. The other thing I've been talking about, though, a lot lately is extending Copilot for Microsoft 365. And that's much more of an in vogue topic because everybody's interested in AI. I could pivot to that in a minute. And last time I saw Paul was at the AI tour.
That's right. In New York City. You were there too. That's right.
Yeah. So I've got that talk right here.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah.
That.
I mean, I think that would be great if you're, I mean, what do you think? Are you folks,
go for it?
I'm open to whatever, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think, Copilot or Teams governance?
Copilot.
Okay, but can I ask? I do have one question about your Teams governance before we start.
There was a bunch of admins in the audience, and forgive me for stereotyping. It's like a lot of times you go to a user group meeting, and that's where the system admins go to learn how to, especially like the Microsoft. There's a Boston area Microsoft 365 group, and a lot of the folks who go there's some developers, but mostly you get admins, power users, people who are running the governance for their org and trying to figure out. So that's what was in my head when I chose that.
And I appreciate that. That's part of the reason why I'm okay when we made the decision to be okay with a smaller group, but a little bit more focused. And again, we do get a different crowd, here at these meetings, which we're excited about. I think that topic sounds great. And, all these things are sort of intertwined, right? I mean, I would submit that Graph is at the heart of everything Microsoft, right? Whether you're building apps on Azure or Microsoft 365 or D365. And then on the Microsoft 365 side, you put Teams on top of that, which is clearly core to people's business. And in healthcare, huge right now because of all the remote health and home health. You've got all the home health stuff, remote patient monitoring, which a lot of that stuff is actually built into Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare, but sits on top of Teams. And then, of course, then you put Copilot on top of that, which everybody's interested in. So I would actually submit they're sort of all tied together. And if you don't mind, I want to just ask one question. I'll let you run.
Sure.
But you made an interesting assertion that was that you had been finding that decision makers in the organization get paralyzed because of whether apps are turned on or off, and then that tends to dissuade developers, if you will, right? If anything, maybe just becomes the path is not as clear. And so the question I have is, if an organization does not enable the App Store, will that automatically lock out developers from at least trying to create an app and then take it to their boss? Or will the developer get a lockdown experience right away, without even having a chance to put together something to show their boss?
I mean, the usual advice would be to get a developer tenant.
Okay.
Which I'm not sure what the status of it is. They've been historically free.
Makes sense. Yeah.
I don't know if that's exactly true because we've had some fraud problems.
Yeah.
With people grabbing a bunch of free ones and probably doing evil things.
There's always a couple.
So right now it's kind of like, I'm not sure what the status of it is. You might need to have a Visual Studio subscription or be an MVP or something.
Okay.
But
that makes sense.
We would encourage people don't develop in production any more than you would develop in your production Azure tenant.
Yeah.
Probably, right? But that said, there's different controls for the App Store.
Yeah.
There's first-party apps, which are like the ones like Word, Excel. Even when they come up in Teams, those are apps. They follow the same model. There's third-party apps, so I could go get an app from Salesforce or something.
Yeah.
And then there's custom apps or enterprise apps that are built for a company.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's all. If we go down that path, I show you how to turn all those on.
Yeah, no.
Granularly turn them on.
That's
and off.
what I was looking for. Yeah,
you can do things like say, well, I'm only going to allow this one app, or I'm going to allow all apps, but I'm going to block these three.
Yeah.
You can do all kinds of.
And transitioning into this, I'm assuming Copilot is one of those, right? That would fall under the first-party apps that you would, or is it not there yet?
Yeah, it is. Whatever Jira is
Jira is a good example of a third-party one. Yeah, they've got a Teams integration.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Again, I'm not coming at it from a pure technologist standpoint. I think what I'm looking at, and I wonder whether the conversation is going to get there. I would love for it to. A lot of what I'm being asked is more from the leadership level. Is what can I do, right? And so I think when you look at it from an admin and technologist perspective, lockdown for safety makes sense, right? One of the ways that I've always used the conversation to change that lockdown is to allow leadership to understand what's possible. And it's really interesting to me to think about Copilot custom apps, on Teams and things like that. They actually unlock a lot for the organization. And so I don't know, and maybe this is a subsequent conversation.
Really can.
Like I'm being asked how and what, right? Like what can I get done?
Mm-hmm.
Like how does it unlock a CFO's organization to be able to do more, right?
Right.
So, again, scares the bejesus out of the CIO, but these are the conversations that are actually going to unlock AI to be a functional tool within the organization.
Right.
So I'm really interested if we get
Cool.
Yeah, me
and
too.
I see what's
Sounds good.
going on. I've got my displays are reversed. So you all get to see what I'm supposed to see. And I get to see what everybody else.
You've got a lot of slides.
I love this. Yeah, I'm not going to have time for them all. Yeah, I can tell you. So that's a nice segue into one of the slides
I'm good
actually.
at segues.
Yeah, thanks. Which is this one, which is sort of like saying, holy smoke, there's a lot of co-pilots, right? I mean, our marketing team decided to call everything co-pilot. But I think there's some wisdom in it because they're sort of converging,
Mm-hmm.
But right now we've got a bunch of products with Copilot in the name. And right now, so Copilot for Microsoft 365 is a first-party app that runs inside of a bunch of places in Microsoft 365. It runs in Teams, it runs in Outlook, Word, PowerPoint. It'll help you write your Word document or lay out a spreadsheet, things like that. It's all and all these other places, right? Now, what I'm going to talk about then is extending the Copilot for Microsoft 365. So you get. Have any of you used my Copilot for Microsoft 365? You have. You have?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
How about you? Okay.
Very lightly, though. In all
We'll
fairness,
introduce
like
you
I've been
to
so
it.
busy, I haven't
We'll
been able to
introduce you
find
to
the
it today.
features.
But it's a first party app. So from the perspective of Teams or Word or something, it's a first party app.
Cool.
Right. And so you end up in this weird world of apps within apps within apps.
Mm.
That's the way it goes. So right now, the two things that in yellow there that I'll talk about are plugins and connectors. Those are the two ways that you can extend Copilot for Microsoft 365 and bring in your own business data into that AI conversation. Right now, those get managed the same as Teams apps. So there is overlap, right? The way you would install an app and deploy it in your org, which is not in this deck, but I can switch over to the other, or I can just show you in my own tenant, is the same, right? The way I would install Jira for Teams, let's say, versus a Copilot plugin for Jira for Teams. In fact, I'll even show you that they're kind of the same underneath. So that's hopefully that helps to clarify it a little bit. Copilot for Microsoft 365. I'm going to go quick through some of these slides, but basically it's taking all the different places in Microsoft 365 and adding that AI agent to it. And right now they're somewhat fragmented. At the risk of saying too much, I'll just say we're working on it.
Yeah.
It's very early days, and so sometimes if people don't like what they're getting out of the Copilot experience, I'm like, look, how long ago before we even had ChatGPT or any of this stuff, right? So it's early days, and there's really exciting stuff coming.
No, I agree. We're definitely there for the long haul.
And
Just like,
so I feel like when somebody asks me, well, gee, I tried this and it didn't do what I wanted,
Mm.
and I'm not sure if it's worth the money. I'm like, okay, cool. Wait.
Yeah.
So use the word yet.
Yeah,
right?
keep on, just kind of keep an eye on it, and when it meets your needs, jump in.
Well, the other
You know?
thing that I've been finding, I don't know if you're seeing this, but I am literally up to almost $200 in AI subscriptions now, because I have Copilot Pro, but that actually gets sponsored from Microsoft. But then we have ChatGPT Pro. We just did Gemini Ultra. We always get the Pro because we find it from a business perspective, like when you're really using it in business, it makes a huge difference, right?
Mhm.
And then there's a great Microsoft partner called Perplexity. I'm sure you've heard of them, that allows you to actually try different LLMs. And then finally, Grammarly. Like we can't, in our organization, we can't rule out Grammarly. And so literally those are the 6 tabs that we're finding more and more open in our environment. And I find like when I go into my Microsoft 365 stuff, that's when I'm most interested in Copilot, right? Especially for us, like for example, the sales and dynamics is a hot thing, right? Teams, being able to ask about our teams meetings. But then, and we're seeing this in healthcare too. For another real quick example, and then sorry, Bob, I'll let you run here. Think about this: what happens if the doctor asks a clinical question, right? So what we've put together, we actually use a machine learning model to figure out, hey, is the question even clinical? Because if it's clinical, you should send it to whatever LLM the organization supports for clinical triage, right?
Right.
So it's fascinating. Stuff. So yeah, I would just add that maybe it's also like picking the right AI for the right tool.
Yeah, and at some point they start talking to each other. Maybe.
Yes. Yeah.
So here's
But to that point though, it's also defining the rules correctly, right? Because I think when you talk about utilizing it in a real world example in hospital, you're also talking about adverse event reporting, but
100%.
But those rules, if
Yeah.
you don't feed it to the world you're looking at from Copilot perspective,
Yeah.
those rules have to be spot on too.
100%.
But that's the hard work that people don't do in the beginning. Of saying like,
Yeah.
define the rules or else
Yeah.
a tool without a rule is really not useful.
100%. I'm going to follow up with you after the meeting about that because we're doing some cool work in that space. I'll follow up afterwards.
So here's a quick. This is just kind of the out of the box, right? So what milestones are on Project Falcon, and a lot of this is pre-recorded just to make it fast, and because this was presented in New York where we didn't know if we had good internet. So, and yeah, it's going and finding this information in a document somewhere, right? And summarizing it for me. So it's basically taking. It's how many of us have used ChatGPT? Probably everybody, right? Mm-hmm. So imagine that, except for it knows, it has access to all the content in your Microsoft 365.
Yeah, no, that's super cool.
And I've got a slide that I just skipped because of the amount of time that we don't have. But it doesn't. It uses what's called a RAG pattern. So I'm familiar with that. So it's the retrieval augmentation generation pattern, where rather than training the AI on your data, which would be kind of scary, that you could keep it contained, it's going to go and query a semantic index, a search index, and get the data, and then feed that in with the prompt to the large language model, such that the large language model never gets anything, that it never retains anything after the prompt, and also such that it will respect your permissions that you've set. So if I ask a question about that, the answer is in a certain spreadsheet, but I don't have access to that spreadsheet, and I don't see that. Right?
Yeah,
it respects, which is kind of the type of difference that you see between kind of consumer products or general market products and enterprise stuff that would come from a company like Microsoft, because everything's got a permission and everything can be locked down and stuff like that. So let's let me fast forward a little bit.
That's a key point too. I saw that early on. That's why we went all in 12 months ago. Because from my perspective, when I saw this, and then just knowing, with Microsoft having Active Directory, like you can secure it. I was like, it was sort of a no. I saw the writing on the wall. I was like, okay.
So what I've been working on is this idea of a plugin. So how do you? So the we're kind of skipping directly into some other stuff here. But what I've been working on is really about how do I take this, and I'll see if my spotlight will work. And instead of just having it know about Microsoft 365 content, have it know about other stuff, other business content, right? So the way that this works then is, if you look over here, here's my device isn't, I should have tested that before, but so the basic Copilot, right, for Microsoft 365, it's taking all your tenants' content, gets fed into a semantic index. So we have an old school search index, which has now grown into a semantic index.
Mm.
Instead of matching on, text fields, text matching with maybe some lematization in it, stuff to take the different variations of words, it's not doing that. It's literally vectorizing it into artificial intelligence, almost like concepts. And so you could ask a question in Japanese, and it will find it.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter. It's the meaning that it's going after, not the syntax, not the literal words. And then this is sort of a simplified version of the architecture, right? So everything's going into semantic index. Copilot, inside that Copilot box is, there's a large language model. It's OpenAI, GPT-4, I think. But there's also an orchestration layer that is going to look at the user's prompt, figure out what the user's trying to do, look for content in the semantic index, use the Microsoft Graph, which is the main API for across the whole suite of Microsoft 365, retrieve the content, and then augment the prompt with the content so that when the large language model gets it, it can reason over the available content as well as what the user is looking for. So there's two ways to really extend this. One is with what's called a graph connector, which I'll show second. Graph connectors are going to take your data. Maybe you've got some data in a database somewhere, or maybe it's a whole content store. Maybe it's your clinical trial data. I don't know. And it's going to feed it right into the semantic index and right into Microsoft 365. So that kind of solves the problem in one way. It's like, okay, I know what a spreadsheet is, and I know what a Teams message is, and I know what an email message is, but now I also know what this business data is. And it's right there inside of Microsoft 365 itself. That's one approach.
Bob, would you snap? So it was just on a project where everyone's talking about where Snowflake is. Where would, if I'm looking at an entire environment that's based on Snowflake, where would that live and how would you connect to that?
I don't know enough about Snowflake. You mean like Snowflake schema and
Yeah,
BI kind of
I can
stuff?
help if you want.
Yeah, sure.
So if you don't want, well, based on this, I think there's limitations here only because we're really looking at the Microsoft 365 implementation of Copilot, right? So the official message is, hey, we want you to customize this through Azure AI Studio or through Copilot Studio, right? That's what he had on his previous slide.
Yep.
But the minute you start talking about Snowflake, that means you're talking about your own proprietary data, your own line of business, right? And to Bob's point, maybe it is HLS data, like research data that people are dropping in Parquet files or whatever, right?
Sure.
So to extend to that data, you would go in Bob's screen here, you would do it through the plugin model. You would go through plugin. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is more doing plugins or doing more real-time queries?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Snowflake threw me off because I'm not a data guy, but
me neither.
I'm doing,
Yeah.
I'll show it in the venerable Northwind database.
Yeah.
Which is just was a nice way to get my hands on some sample data.
Yeah.
But that's an RDBMS, and
Yeah, of course.
I completely perverted it by bringing it into Azure Table Storage, which is a NoSQL database. And the code is insane, but it's not insane. It's not insane. It's just probably not. It would probably make a real data person's term. But
the important thing to note from an enterprise perspective, though, is in Bob's previous slide where he showed the Azure AI Studio. If you drop down to that level, you can do the same stuff that the Microsoft engineers are doing against Snowflake, and then even bring it up through Grafton. So I'll just stop
Okay.
there. But there's
Yeah,
that.
no, it's a question
That's
I was
what
getting.
that's sort of where we build. So we build down at the
Yeah.
Azure AI Studio level, where we have access to the enterprise data stores. PeopleSoft is a big one we're working on now.
Yeah.
So
Oh, nice.
The question I was getting, I've gotten the question like 2 or 3 times now. So
Yeah.
that's why I was like, just wanted to feel what you guys thought of it. Again, I don't know the answer to it. That's why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
It's like I said, it's an
no,
informal
thank
meeting.
you for
so-
helping, because I think, the plugin is the real-time one. So basically, in the case of the Graph Connector, you're injecting some data, and it's just going to be these little content blobs.
Yeah.
It's not a complicated thing, and so the advantage of it is that you can do semantic reasoning over it. So, for instance, an example that I often use, the plugin is real-time retrieval, right? If I want to know what's the inventory of chai right now, right? I need a plugin because it's real time. And the semantic index takes time to index things. It's not real time.
Yeah.
I can't really take action on it. It's just a copy of the data.
Gotcha.
So if I want to say, what's the inventory of chai, I want a plugin. If the question is really what products in our catalog would be good for a holiday promotion, well, that's not in the Northwind database.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. So that would be more like, okay, let's take the entire product catalog and put it right into the semantic index.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then the intelligence can look at it and say, oh, holidays, they like hot beverages. Maybe some chai, maybe some hot cocoa, maybe some, right? And there would be no syntactic.
Is there pumpkin spice in it somewhere?
Pumpkin spice latte. And yeah, exactly. All right, so let's look at the plugin first. Right now, there's 3 ways to get a plugin, and I'm going to show the first one. So the sort of pro dev approach. I like to say code first. This wasn't my slide, although it's close enough. But I like to say I like to consider all the developers to pre-professionals. So I like to say code first, or pro code rather than pro developer. But anyway, if you want to write in a traditional imperative programming language like JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, C#, then you're going to use the technique that I'm going to show. We have another approach, which is I haven't seen come into a lot of use, which is there's this whole connector model around the Power Platform where you can build things low code and then connect it to different backend services. Those can be used as plugins, but right now it's closed to just partners who are approved in the plugin Power Platform plugin program, whatever that is. And then there's low code developers can use something called Copilot Studio to build these. I will say that right now at this point in time, the richest approach is the one that I'll show you. If you want, it's the most stable and the most capable. And I'll point out why when I get into the demo. So the key is there's this thing in Teams called a message extension that becomes a Copilot plugin. So let me show you what a message extension is first, because this way we kind of build on skills and tools that are already there. So I'm kind of Rabia, my colleague Rabia is in the warehouse, and I want her to check on the inventory. So I could just ask her to check on the inventory of chai. And what would she have to do? She'd have to go find a machine, look up in the ERP system chai, get the information, what shelf is it on, go count the boxes, come back, maybe it was wrong, go back, log in, and then update the inventory there, and then go tell me that she's updated the inventory, right? So it's kind of cumbersome, right? So message extensions, we haven't even got to AI yet, right, are helpful in this way, in that I can look up the inventory information and just give it to her. So what do I want? Oh, I want chai. Okay. And it's going to go look up chai. And then and if there was more than one choice, there would be more than, if it matched more than one product. And then I can click on it and I get what's called an adaptive card. So if you're not familiar, adaptive cards are these little pieces of interactive content that you can generate. They work in Teams and Outlook and throughout the Microsoft 365 suite. And here it's given us an adaptive card with all the information. So now, not only does Rabia doesn't have to look it up, but I've also eliminated the possibility of errors. if there was two products that were similar. I'm staring at it. That's the product. So let's pretend she's in the warehouse. She's maybe using her phone, and she finds out, oh, they miscounted. There's another. I found another case. So she can just go and update the stock level right from the cart. Now I can see in the chat with Rabia that she's updated it, right? So it saves a whole bunch of back and forth. It saves her switching. The problem with application switching is not application switching. Right? We're all real good at Alt Tab or Control Tab now. The problem is when you switch applications, you enter like at the front door, and then you got to go find the relevant information every time. It's like it's kind of a reset, right? It's like, okay, great. Go look this up. And then how many times have you had to copy and paste information between apps just because they didn't have this type of integration? Okay, so that's what a message extension is. Under the covers of the message extension is this thing called an app manifest. And this is a JSON structure that describes the app to end users and to teams, and guess what, also to Copilot. So there's a bunch of mumbo jumbo in here, who developed it, and the name and description are super important because that's how Copilot is going to know what my app does and whether or not it should use this plugin or not, right? And so you'll notice that we have this incredibly detailed description because we wanted Copilot to really understand what was going on. Then if I scroll down, you'll see that so this uses the Azure bot framework just as an infrastructure. So it's not really a bot, but the bot framework provides a secure channel, real-time, two-way secure channel. So that's why they used it.
I was wondering about that.
And this has been around for years, this part, right? And then inside of that, this message extension, which was called a compose extension until somebody renamed it, I have commands. So the first one is inventory search, but I'm going to save that for later because that's the fancy one. Let's start with a simple one, discount search. So really important here is the title and description, because without that, Copilot won't know what this command is. Search for discounted products by category. So it could, if I give it a product category, it can go find the discounted products. And you can see the details of my parameter, right? And Copilot is smart enough to be able to read this. In fact, one of my colleagues did this same presentation in Japan, in Japanese, and it worked. So Copilot was able to take her request in Japanese, look in my manifest written in English, and it knew what to do because it's all semantic.
It's amazing.
So next one is the revenue search. And what was cool about this is to find products based on their revenue. Now, I'm a lazy guy. I didn't want to, how many ways can you express a range of numbers in a text field, right? The options are endless. I could have tried to write all the different expression handlers or different ways of handling it, but I've got AI. So I told in the description, Copilot, whatever the user types, if they say more than 50K, fine. Translate it into either the word high, low, or a range of integers with a dash in the middle, right? And it will translate the user's query, and it seems to do this pretty reliably. I had to try a few things to get it right, but now that way I'm just using one JavaScript function, the split function, to just get the high and low, and I'm done, right? 2 lines of code. So this was my first in my life experience where the AI is literally like doing I'm not just doing it manually, it's part of my programming, right? It's not even like GitHub Copilot where it's composing code for me. It's literally, I'm instructing the computer in natural language as part of my software.
The parameters is going to be prompt, right? The whole parameter attribute is going to be prompt, right? Internally.
Yeah, you'll see when I get in a minute, I'll show you what happens from the prompt. But yes, it's going to look at the prompt, try to figure out which command try to figure out what the parameter values should be, and then it's going to look at the adaptive cards that come back and interpret the results, which is pretty cool. So here's the fancy one. This is the revenue. This is the inventory search. And the first one, I think I scrolled by it, is the product name. And that's what you saw me type to Rabia, chai. By the way, there were 3 tabs in that pop-up to Rabia corresponding to these 3 commands.
Oh, okay.
So I can also look for category name, inventory status, supplier city, or stock query, which is another one of these little ranges. And you know, at first it didn't work, and then I had to say, only use this if you need an exact number. You know, it's like I'm telling it stuff in English. And okay, so now this works kind of like an Amazon catalog, right? Like I want to filter, you ever start filtering products? I only want beverages. Okay, no, I only want beverages that are low on stock. I only want beverages supplied out of London that are low on stock. So the more anything I leave blank doesn't apply. Anything that I fill in, it just gets cuts down the data more and more. Okay, so now let's see how this works in Copilot. And note that there's a log file on the bottom, so you can see that's my code running and what Copilot asks. So I prompted, please find Northwind products with more than 50K revenue along with ad campaigns. And it queried down the bottom, revenue in range 50000 dash. So it followed my convention, queried twice. Okay, it's a new product. You know, what can I say? It's not perfect. I don't know why it queried twice. What's cool is that it not only found the products, but then it went into the semantic index and found documents with those product names in it that related to ad campaigns. So, I mean, this is a demo, so I made up the documents, but basically it's, you know, this is fairly realistic. I would hire a company to run each ad campaign. It would be in my SharePoint somewhere. And now it's finding this stuff. And and you should never trust it because it's an AI. So how do you solve that? Well, you hover over the little reference, right? And you see what the reference is. And then if you want, you can even click into the document and see what the document is. All right, so let's try another one. So I'm going to type new chat. And now there's a button for new chat. This is a slightly old UI. You always want to do that. And this is a good practice if you're using ChatGPT or something too, because it will chain the prompts. So it will kind of in order to kind of keep track of the conversation. But the problem is if I want to change the subject, it's going to keep talking about the old stuff too. You know, it's not going to get it. So new chat is the magic word for, okay, stop thinking about what we've been talking about.
Forget that semantic stuff.
Forget that, and now we're starting again.
We're starting with new semantic stuff.
So I type new chat, which seems to help a lot. Check Northwind inventory for dairy products low on stock and show a table with references to the details for each product. So it's now notice the query at the bottom. It did a category name of dairy, figured out that the dairy was a category. It knew about low stock because of manifest. It said what the different inventory statuses are. It got back 4 products. There they are. And Kel Scandal, we're almost out of Camembert. And we didn't order any. Now, what I kind of take from this, and mind you, I cherry picked these a little bit, like it doesn't always come back perfect. I picked good examples, but I was impressed that I didn't ask it what columns. There's a whole bunch of columns in that database. But because I asked it about low stock, it seems to have anticipated that I wanted to know how many are in stock, how many are in order, and what's the reorder levels. Wow, I didn't even have to ask it. That's exactly what I want. And we should have reordered at 20. When it hit 20, we're down to 19, and we haven't ordered any yet. So what I can do is I can hover over the reference and bring up the adaptive card. And just like you saw me before, I can take action from the adaptive card. So let's go ahead and order 50 more units. Done. Right, and you can see in the log file that we did that. So a clarification here is you still can't really, Copilot cannot, at this time, take action. It can present an adaptive card that can take action. So when you click on the adaptive card, it's calling my app directly. It's not going through Copilot. If I said, hey, Copilot, please order more Camembert, it wouldn't be able to do it.
Unless you made a plugin to do it.
At the moment, it wouldn't be able to do it.
Really?
At the moment, it could show me an adaptive card and say, please use this card to do it. And I think this is part of the evolution, right?
Yeah, of course.
Please order. Oh, I didn't mean to order a new car. Right. So we'll get there. We'll get there. All right. So, and now let's use its ability to compose and summarize information. So I'm like, why are these things low on stock? What's going on? So please draft an email to our procurement team asking if they've had any delivery issues with these suppliers. So I love that it knew that products have suppliers. It had those products. So this shows multi-turn, where it's remembering each turn is a back and forth interaction. It knows that, okay, I had 4 products, but they came from 3 different suppliers, and please let me know if you've had any recent issues with these suppliers, right? So would be nice in the future if it would bring me into Outlook and actually write the email there, but it's not there yet. So that's what the plugins do, and it's really been fun to work on, and there's more cool stuff coming.
So this is entirely your custom plugin, right?
That's my custom plugin, yeah. I wrote it with Rabia, who I mentioned in the demo, Rabia Williams, who would be here, except she lives in Brisbane, Australia, so it's
That's always
kind of far. But so she and I wrote this plugin together.
So the code in the background, how much time did that take?
Not that much. I mean, it was mainly, the biggest challenge for me was wrestling a highly normalized database into table storage so that I could have a lab. There's also a hands-on lab, which I'll point you to. So I could make a lab that uses Azurite, which is a local storage emulator, because I didn't want students to have and this was at a lab, hands-on lab at Ignite last year. I didn't want students to have an Azure subscription.
Yeah.
And have like SQL Azure or something there, which would have been easier from a coding point of view. But no, the coding part, it was a little bit of it was not fully baked when we started, so there was a little bit of trial and error to get it all working.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a lot. It wasn't a ton.
A few hours.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
It just feels very lightweight. It feels very like the way you showed the code. I think the biggest challenge that I would have is getting into the conversational description, right? Like you were saying, there was a challenge of I had to just say it as if I'd say it.
Yeah.
That kind of breaks my brain a little bit.
That was an epiphany for me one day.
Can I add to that? Because this is a really, 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 really important concept, especially in healthcare. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And actually, it's really important when you're comparing Microsoft to other vendors with LLMs right now. And so in the industry right now, there's 2 things that people are working on, including Microsoft. One is this RAG technique that Bob was talking about. And you can do RAG. Honestly, you can do RAG just cutting and pasting into a window. You don't really need to connect to a database, right? Especially with the new huge context window that Gemini has. You can literally paste a book in there to start questioning it. That's RAG. Technically, that's RAG.
Right, good point.
So, and then if you go to the plugin, then you can do RAG. But what I'm getting at here, that's a fundamentally from a computer science, from a machine learning and an AI perspective, that's a fundamentally different approach than the other approach, which is called fine tuning. So Microsoft does both, right?
Yeah.
But they seem to be all in on prompt templates and prompt engineering instead of fine tuning. Not in all cases, but let me give you, because this is a healthcare group, let me give you exactly what I'm meaning about. This is something that we're sharing with leadership right now, and we're sharing with everybody. So if you just do a quick Google search, Microsoft a couple months ago, they released something called prompt-based. Actually, it might have been longer than a couple months ago. But essentially, prompt-based is just a core for creating super sophisticated prompt templates. So the first thing that they built to showcase prompt-based, this is a GitHub repo, by the way, you find it in GitHub. The first thing they did to showcase prompt-based was they created something called MedPrompt. And so basically what MedPrompt is and there's a Nature paper on this, it's been peer reviewed, it came out by Microsoft Research, so you can find all this online in the GitHub repo. So what you can think of this as is that, so behind the scenes, and to your point, like that language, putting that together, super important, super sophisticated, and you can sort of burn it into your application when you're done, right? Yeah. But so the proof is in the pudding. So right now, the most common in-service large language models tuned for clinical triage, so asking a clinical question, first was Google MedPalm and MedPalm 2. They came out, they're at about 80% with clinical triage. Then second, Anthropic has a vendor called John Snow Labs, and they fine-tuned for clinical LLMs too. They're at roughly over 80% as well. So Microsoft just submitted a paper on MedPrompt. So this is another peer-reviewed paper that's been published up in, I don't know if it's Nature, but one of the sites. And they're hitting 90% just by using finely crafted, prompt templates, which, underneath, it's all the same thing, right? There's one core group of engineers somewhere in Redmond that's building all this stuff for Microsoft 365 team to use, the healthcare team to use, the Dynamics team to use, right? And so I would just submit that where we are right now, that's a core thing to sort of pay attention to, especially if you're interested at all on the clinical side, in the clinical LLM space, right? It's going to be which underlying technology is going to work better, as we could go forward. So yeah, fascinating stuff. And I just wanted to add that because you're spot on. And as a matter of fact, hopefully now you can see even more so than you might have realized,
Yeah, there's other applications outside of healthcare that's going to be very applicable to.
Sure.
I'm thinking about, but it helps to think about the context of the RAG environment.
Yeah.
And how that can take larger data sets, i.e. like a movie script, and kind of write contextual analysis on top of that.
Yeah. Let me just add one more thing, because this is a really important thing I don't think people are just starting to pick up on now. It's not one or the other. So let's think about a very typical pattern in healthcare right now that's a very rich use case for AI. Let's talk cancer detection and radiology images, right? So let's put together, and by the way, Microsoft, this isn't coming from me. There's actually Microsoft put out some paper on this as well, and this sort of diagram, if you will. But if you think about that workflow, to first do the prediction of if it's cancer, the only way to do that right now is just with the traditional machine learning model. You're not going to be using LLMs at all. So it's going to start with that. Like some machine learning model that's been trained is going to look at the image and it's going to spit out yes or no. I think this is cancer, right? And right now we can do that at about 85 to 90%, right? And that's a whole nother conversation. Some people say that's good or bad. I say it's great in this use case because I don't care if you're wrong 10% of the time. I'm just using it to speed up a workflow. Let's say this
better than the human.
Exactly. So let's say it's like
cancer. I just want
we have exactly right. And so yes, we detected. Let's raise a flag. So then now what you might do in the next step of your workflow or your prompt flow is now you need to send an email to get the provider in the loop because you want to keep the doctor in the loop, right? You're not just going to start ordering surgery. So you see where I'm going with this though. Now we'll engage the large language model. Maybe even in the next step, go call a clinical model. As a matter of fact, that one might even be sitting on another cloud, right? For all we know, it's just a REST endpoint. And so what we're starting to see is this pattern of where you're building these modern AI apps. And just like before, we used to do function calls, and used to map those out. Now it's more about this prompt flow and this workflow, if you will, that supports all these models.
Absolutely. So then let's dive into graph connectors,
Cool stuff.
which is the other option. And I'll be curious, actually, it never occurred to me that this might be, I don't think it is fine tuning.
Oh,
it's not really.
Well, so
because it's still RAG inside of Copilot. Copilot's going to go query that.
It's complex. I'll leave it at that. I mean,
but
like
I think I do know the difference. And if we built another model and used some ADA model or something to train up.
But technically, when you're taking
data, then that would be fine tuning. But
isn't that what the graph team is doing? I'm assuming that's what they're doing. How else do they get the semantic index?
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure I know because there's only one way to do it, and that's to make a call out to something that gives you embeddings, so that then you can put them in the database So it's technically they're doing a combination of both. They're and I'll stop talking there too because
cool.
It's a little cloudy for me after that.
So let's look at this second one. So my choice of data set for this one, and this is a sample that was written by Waldeck and Gary Wallach MasterCard.
Yeah.
Gary Trinder, if you know them, they're big in the community. But it's based on this, which is the sample solution gallery. So we've got all these samples of Microsoft 365 applications, and it's not that important what the content is, but it's something that is familiar to a lot of audiences because a lot of people go to this gallery to find interesting samples that do different things in all the different products. So I'm going to focus on this one, simulate errors on Microsoft Graph with HTTP cats, because simulating errors and making sure that your code handles errors correctly is important, but it's not fun. Cats are fun, so this is good. And two of my teammates, Waldek and Tomomi, actually. So I know Gary worked on some of these samples. He didn't work on this one, but Tomomi is the one who came up with HTTP cats. So for every HTTP status code, she has a humorous cat picture.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so you can see her 429, too many requests, and you can see a whole little gathering of
I know.
cats there. Okay, so and she's also a great developer too. My partner.
Okay.
She happens to have both the left brain and the right brain thing going at the same time. I know she does. So, anyways, here we go. So this is the simplest thing. It's just a node script. So JavaScript running on your desktop. And so I'm going to do npm install. It pulls in some packages, and then npm run create connection. So this whole thing is really just 3 API calls. The first one creates a connection to the graph, and then it sets up a schema. So what does the data structure look like? And that takes about 5 minutes to run, so I'm going to fast forward. And so it's an interesting graph call. It's a graph call that validates the call, but it takes so long to run that instead of returning a result, it returns a URL that says, please check this URL every couple seconds. And eventually I'll let you know when it's done. So at this point, it's created the connection, and it knows what the data structure is going to look like. Now it turns out that gallery is driven by a web service. So the next command, npm run load content, is just going to go through the web service, enumerate all of the samples, and feed them in. Unfortunately, this is much faster into the Microsoft Graph. And now you can imagine that this could be this could be much more complex and fancy. If I maybe when a new sample came in, I would load that. It's a push model, right? Search engines tend to either be a pull model where they go and crawl content, or a push model where you push the content in. The nice thing about a push model there's a couple nice things about it. One is that you get immediate control over what you push in. Second is the crawl model. If your service is down, it fails. If you do a push model, your service comes up and pushes. So as long as the search engine is highly available, you don't have to make every data source highly available. So here's the code. And I'm using the graph, Wallach wrote the code, I think. Tomomi might have, but I don't think she did this particular one. But anyways, it's going to read it's going to go in and create a external connection. So he's using the graph SDK here, which is just a simple little software local programming interface that makes REST calls. So they're just fetch, they're just REST calls. The graph API, the graph SDK does some things like error checking and handling throttling if it gets too busy and says please back off for a while. It makes it a little bit simpler, but it's really, you could just use a fetch for all intents and purposes. So you can see it's just you create a connection, you give it an ID, a name, description, activity settings, and search settings have more details in it. And then the next thing is we create a schema. And so here you can see there's the connection ID I got back from the first one, and now I'm going to push in a schema. We'll take a look at the schema in just a minute. And that's the one that took 5 minutes to run. And then if I go over here, I can see the schema. There's 3 properties that have to be in the schema in order for it to work with Copilot. One is a title. The second one is, and you can see it's got a bunch more, an icon URL. And the third one is a URL pointing to the external content. Pretty simple. And then of course the last thing that I have to show is loading the content, and I'm going to skip all the code that actually goes and queries the web service where the data source is and pages through the data and all that kind of fun stuff, and just get down to the meat of it, which is push item, which pushes one item. We're now enumerating them in a loop, and we're going to push one item in, and that's what that looks like, right? So pretty simple. It's just a JSON structure. It has to agree with the schema, and I'm just going to start pushing stuff in. There's one admin thing I have to do. I have to go into settings, into search and intelligence, and if I go into data sources, you'll see that my sample solution gallery is now there. And so I need to include the results of this data source in, and this applies to kind of the global search as well as Copilot. Before I do that though, I'll also point out that it's created something called a result type, which is just a way of displaying this result. And that result type has an adaptive card in it.
So what is this portal? What is this?
This is the Microsoft 365 admin portal.
Okay. So is it free?
Yeah, but it's part of a Microsoft 365 subscription. It's included. If you have a Microsoft 365 subscription, you get this.
Oh, okay.
So
I have it.
I'm just careful with the word free. Okay. Have you ever had a CIO literally rip your head off because you said something was free, and he's paying $3 million a year for the service?
Yes, I have.
I've watched it happen. My head was intact. But I now know not to say anything is free unless it's really free.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, it's included. How about that?
Or it depends
So
on-
It's included with no additional charge.
Or it depends on your subscription. That was
Right.
the learning. It depends on your subscription.
Right. In this case, all the subscriptions have it because you need to administer the stuff. And then now I'll go back and fix that other thing. I've got to just, by default, I could put this in its own little search experience, but I'm going to say, no, I want this included in the main search experience, and that implies Copilot. So I'll click the button, and there we go. So now let's go over to search, and I will, let's take a look, see if we can find, and in reality, this would take a few minutes to come up. It would take a few minutes.
So the sample you customized your desktop, right? The
Sample, we mean?
the sample you downloaded and they build it and install in the admin.
Yeah.
Now your desktop is fully, this plugin is active.
The desktop, well, yeah, I guess. I mean, everything's browser based.
Oh,
So
yeah,
there's
of
nothing on the
course.
desktop.
Yeah, desktop, whatever.
But yeah, yes. And now you can see I can go to any search box in Microsoft 365 and type HTTP cats and
Oh,
there's the sample, right?
Super.
So now, and it's not only that, but it's used the adaptive card to format the output.
Hmm.
All right, so now let's see what happens there's another one here too. Oh, I'm sorry, the first one didn't have cats, the second one did. All right, sorry. There's one with and one without cats. Oh, I'm sorry, this is a different one. This is the HTTP message extension with cats that Timon wrote. Yeah, so, whatever. So, I type the prompt. I love cats, but I hate HTTP errors. Can you help me? And we'll see what happens, right? It's going to go out and find it. And I'm glad you did it. You know, you can read it, right? It's glad it found it. It tells me a little bit about it. So clearly it read the material. And now, if I want to, I can hover over the reference, which is these little boxes,
This
and
is
get a link, and it brings me
Okay.
to the browser.
Okay, can I take this?
Sure, what do you
I
want?
want to download this.
You want the sample or the
Samples. I
cats.
want to build the tomorrow.
Oh, I'll give you a pointer to the whole thing.
Okay, please.
At the end, probably 2 slides. I've got links to both of the demos, all the code, and one of them has a hands-on lab. The other one has detailed instructions. It's just as good. So there we are. And so to kind of summarize, Copilot plugins, these are kind of the trade-offs. You're getting real time. Whereas Graph Connectors is only however often you sync, and then there's a delay. Permissions in a plugin, permissions and data compliance are up to the writer of the plugin. So you have to instruct the incoming request. If you can find the username in there if you want to do some authentication, some authorization, I should say, to decide, is it okay for me to show this customer, right? Maybe I'm in beverages and I'm not allowed to see the produce products, right? If there's a business rule like that, that's up to the plugin to look at my identity and then figure out what am I allowed to see. Whereas in the case of a graph connector, you push that into Microsoft 365, and I didn't show this, with each item, you have the opportunity to push in an access control list. And then Microsoft 365 will handle that. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because my connector isn't running all the time. It's only running when I push in new content, right? So it can't go check the permissions all the time. Whereas with a plugin, I might have some really wacky rules, you know? I worked with a financial services company once where the business rule was you can only see client information from your own branch office. That was the rule. And that's not built into anything. That's their rule, you know? But you could write that here. You'd have to go figure out what the user is, make a graph call, figure out what office they report to, look at the data item in your database, figure out same office. Okay, I'm going to show it or not, right?
Yeah.
All that stuff would be in your code. Read write. It's sort of read write because you get the adaptive card, which you can update things through the adaptive card. Whereas with the graph connector, it's read only. Right now, those do not support actions back, the call back, because there's nowhere to really call back to. And then on the flip side, the graph connector has semantic index. So it's going to do semantic matching, which your plugin could do, but it would have to be a pretty smart plugin. And we have an example of that too. Another one of my teammates, Aisha Bosch, wrote a different style of plugin that I would love to see her make more content because I think it's brilliant. Basically, she takes, instead of having Copilot parse through the information and figure out what parameters and stuff, she figured out how to just get the original prompt.
Oh,
and then she feeds that into another LLM.
Yeah.
Right.
Super cool.
So she has a custom document search.
Yeah.
Where she trains a smaller language model, and then you can query that through the plugin.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And
That's cool.
The plugin you build it, you are running in the 365. Same plugin we can run in the Teams also.
Yeah.
Oh, it will work all the Teams, everything, right?
Yeah. In fact, they also work in Outlook. Those message extensions,
Oh,
just the raw message, they work in Outlook now too.
Okay.
And Bob, is it correct also? It's safe to. Most of my work I've done in this space, has been more on the Azure Studio side. So
Yeah.
I know at the Azure Studio level, like one of the big reasons we would use plugins is too because it allows us to get to external stuff that's not in the graph.
Right.
Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
At that level too. Okay.
That's exactly
Yeah. Okay.
That's exactly it. Yep.
And then so when we're doing this in Azure AI Studio and we do a plugin, it's really we're calling an API behind the scenes, right? It's like a wrapper for an API. So I'm guessing the Teams team, that's essentially what they did is they put together some sort of wrapper. We're going through them into the OpenAI plugin substructure.
No, actually not yet.
Not yet. Oh, okay.
So there's a thing called did I say yet?
Sorry. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, we're working on it. So there is a new flavor of message extension.
Oh,
Which is
cool.
API message extension.
Which makes
You
sense,
Give
yeah.
it the API.
Yeah.
And you give it the open API spec.
Yeah.
And you give it a manifest.
Nice.
That doesn't yet work with Copilot
Okay.
at the moment. So the one that I showed, and I didn't get into the code, but I'm happy to bring it up. It has, and this is the one you want. Those are the Ignite 23-lab is a hands-on lab where you'll build the Northwind example, and the graph connector is the second link there. This message extension is based on these little messages, these little bot messages called invoke activities.
Yeah.
So you'll get one saying, I got a query and here's the parameter values.
Okay.
And you'll respond with a set of adaptive cards.
Interesting.
It's not even a schema-based thing. It's like an adaptive card. So you could actually make it look like whatever you want.
Yeah, sure,
Right.
sure. Yeah.
And then when you take action, that doesn't actually go through Copilot, but
Yeah.
there's a way of making a button on an adaptive card that calls back and does another invoke activity that says somebody just pushed this button.
Yeah.
And by the way, here's the data that's on the card because you could have input fields.
Yeah.
So it's like a post back kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. And then you take action. So that's it's more primitive than that.
Yeah.
What I think is going to be interesting is to see, and I haven't seen much from those.
Yes.
platforms,
Yeah. Come
but-
back next month, please.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. I hope this is interesting.
Thank you.
We're probably running way over, right? So I had a feeling that would happen.
Yeah, that's okay. We always
But anyways, what I think is interesting is we even with the Power Platform plugins or Power Platform connector plugins,
Yeah.
is where it's just an API.
Mm-hmm.
How smart is Copilot really going to be? And I'm starting to learn that on the inside, but the reality is, I had to tweak those parameters to get it to work reliably,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I had to tweak the descriptions.
Yeah.
And to your point, if I hadn't had to denormalize and augment the data because it was in normalized format and I needed it in NoSQL table storage, this is just a bunch of JavaScript code chunking through data. Unfortunately, it's a small data set, practically it's the whole thing in the memory. But if it wasn't for that, most of the work would be in defining
The definitions.
the definitions.
Yeah.
The question is, like, a lot of APIs are fancy, right? Like, take an OData source, take the Microsoft Graph. Could I, if I could get an open API definition of the entire Microsoft Graph, could I feed that in and now it knows everything? I doubt it. It's not that smart, right? I mean, you gotta plan your way. Well, first I'm gonna get the user ID, and then based on the user ID, I'm trying to create a to-do item. So I'm gonna get their list of to-do lists.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna the to-do list ID for their default list. And now I take that and I do a third call to insert the to-do item.
Right.
And not only that, but it's OData. So I could put $filter, I could put $skip, and I mean, is it going to be smart enough to figure all that out? I don't imagine it will be in
It's the same
V1.
limitation for like the GitHub profile, right? Like that's a great tool for basically taking a lot of the effort away from doing a lot of the coding work. You still have to be a pretty good developer to know how to actually tell it what to do.
Yes, and also to look at it and see if it's gotten better.
Oh, yeah, better.
When I first started using it, I felt like there were times when it saved me time and times when it lost me time.
Yeah.
Because it would give me a believable enough chunk of code. And I would say, oh yeah, that looks about right.
And then it doesn't.
And then it doesn't work. And now I got to go figure it out. Like now I got to go debug it. It would have been faster to write it myself.
Yeah.
However, on a project that I'm working on now, I've been thrilled. So
Yeah.
it's gotten so much better, and it also is good at handling some of the repetitive stuff.
Yeah.
Like you ever have a JSON structure here and some other structure here, and you're going to have this block of code that just copies all the things field by field. How many times have we all written that?
Oh,
Now it's smart enough to kind of, it notices the pattern and it just writes it for you. It's like, thank you.
Well, I've seen people using it in, Figma and in Notion to be able to quite literally document, like from the product side of things, document the interface, with every interaction in Figma, and it can pump out all of the interface documentation. It would normally take you weeks.
We're doing that with Epic now for healthcare for
Epic,
training.
yeah.
Like, so imagine being in a hospital, but being able to have the LLM provide the help files in the context of what you're running, right? Because Epic's so big, right? But a hospital might only have 4
Yeah, I
modules.
see people use Notion for that too. It's really
Cool. I'll have to look into Notion. I've heard the name before, but
Notion, I mean, Notion is it's a general automation, like it's
Okay.
a project automation tool.
Yeah.
But what it's really used well
Without,
for is
admin I cannot
snapping
do it.
right into
I have,
Figma where it's all
this is Microsoft
design
account.
based.
Okay.
So taking things from US
Microsoft account.
Yes.
Yeah.
Without
Through
admin, I
that
cannot do
process.
anything.
Interesting.
And it works much more. business
I think
requirements.
You need a tenant in which
Yeah.
you can work.
It's
Oh.
interesting to see.
Now, this particular
We're
sample
talking
works
very
on
much about
Fortinet.
coding.
Yeah.
This particular sample is unrealistic.
There's
in one
automation
way.
happening. in the business.
It has
This I
no-
cannot do
it has-
without this.
Snapping those two
Hmm?
together.
In this sample, it has no security.
No security. No, I
So as a
understand.
result, you
No.
can use it inside of
Hands
Microsoft's
down, it's
Oh,
not
internal network.
technical.
Internet. So, but still, I don't need this one.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
To install.
Yeah, no,
Like
I've seen
admin,
that too. It's
yeah,
10x my
admin.
productivity.
Yeah.
Like as somebody that's
Admin
almost a
Microsoft
30-year software
365.
engineer,
Oh, yeah.
it literally
No,
10x
you
my
should go to
productivity.
Teams.
But that's enough.
Hmm?
That's all
Go
I
to
needed.
Teams.
I didn't need it to write all my stuff
Go to
for me.
Microsoft
This is Microsoft Teams.
Some guys that I just.
Yeah.
Meta specs.
Click on apps.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah.
Randomly. But what they're trying to do is they're trying
Click
to
on
build-
manage my apps.
They're trying to build
Click on
an
upload an app.
attacker of relational databases.
Oh,
Okay.
Using
Now,
ontologies.
this-
And
That's
use
that's
that
all the
to
permission you need for this sample.
speed the
Okay.
So you could totally run this
actual
on your laptop with your thing in
Interesting.
In
Microsoft's
upload.
tenant.
From oh.
Well, you have to do the
Yeah.
lab. You'll have the upload package
Oh.
after you do the lab.
No, do the lab.
When
I
they
need to
showed some
log in
examples
into the
of
admin portal.
Yeah.
No.
365 admin. Because you showed me 365
Yeah.
admin.
But you still have.
I don't have a permission.
That was for
Yeah.
the
So I think everyone thinks.
that was for the graph connector.
Oh, graph connector. But this
The
sample.
plugin one doesn't need it.
Okay, this is a graph connector. Oh,
Yeah,
graph
no,
connector required.
The graph connector would actually,
Yeah.
you can't do that in the Microsoft tenant
Yeah.
because your graph connector.
And
would be
I
visible
think
to
one
everybody in
important thing too is you
Microsoft.
continue to talk to
And
these
so
folks.
obviously
Is
they
Yeah,
have
except
for
graph
that.
connector.
is to-
we can do
to
it.
remind
the
them,
Teams upload,
at
yes,
least
but
in my
the
opinion,
North one, the plugin
when
one,
we're
you
talking
can
about
do
building modern
the
AI
Teams
apps,
with the
it's not
Teams
like
upload.
you're
Okay.
going to only use
Absolutely.
AI to build the app, right?
So once
Like I think
you,
it's really important
install
as
the
a
Teams
developer
Pro,
still
it
to
will work
pick
in the
and
Office
choose the right
365 web also.
frameworks and
Huh?
pieces
Everywhere.
for your
It works,
application at the
only
right
in the
place.
Teams
Exactly.
Oh,
right?
only
Yeah,
Teams.
exactly.
But that's,
These are very good.
Okay. But only the connector, if you do.
if you get,
It
chat
just
me in Teams
changes
and
the
we'll connect.
functionality of the development.
Chat,
Yeah.
just say hi to me in
Changes
Teams.
Where?
Yeah.
How to do?
So just
Yeah.
go to the
And-
chat,
But the
Where
developers
is
still
that chart? Okay.
you know, and type
Yeah,
my name, Bob
yeah.
Computer
German,
science is still computer science.
or click
Yeah,
on
yeah.
make a new
How it
message
applies is different, right?
Yeah.
Like computer science degrees.
and type my name, Bob German, up here in
Yeah.
the two.
You know, all the things, I'm not building OSs from the ground up.
German, GERMAN.
Yeah, it's all built
All
on
the
each
concepts
other,
are
of
still
course.
right? So I think
GE?
when I see this, what I'm
GERMAN.
really excited about is, you know,
G as in
I'm able
grape.
to follow.
Okay.
Yeah.
ERMA.
Okay. Yeah, I got
Just
it.
like the country.
Yeah.
Another great parallel is
Oh, I know.
education, by
Just-
the way. So
Don't
my
send it to all those other
my
people.
Oh, no, no, no.
fiance is a
Click
middle
that.
school
And I'll
teacher
just
at
say- and I'll
Salem,
just type
Salem
hi.
Collins Middle School.
It looks
She's
like you don't use
15-year
Teams a lot.
teacher, mathematics, and
There you
and
go.
you know anybody that knows
So now
anything
we're
about
connected.
teachers in the schools in the U.S. is they're all overworked, just like programmers have
Yeah,
been
let me know if you have
historically, right?
questions. I'd love to have
And so
contact
one of the
info.
cool
Yeah.
things
So can you do
is
this
that we're
PowerPoint?
seeing in the
Pardon?
education
Yeah.
space, it's the
Yeah, I'll
same
give you
thing. Like
everything.
what you can do is you can take an
Yeah.
effective teacher
Absolutely.
and then 10x that with the tool.
Yeah.
And
So you work
really,
in
it's
this
not
building?
about job replacement
No, I
or
work at
anything.
home.
No, all you're doing is making that person happy again so they can
I
do the
live in
job.
very
The whole
New
reason why they
Hampshire.
got in their
I
career,
live in
right,
very-
was
I
to
live in
teach
Southern
students,
Hampshire.
not to do the 15. And frankly, we did the same thing in healthcare.
Yeah.
We force people to use an electronic health record. If you ask any doctor today what the biggest problem in healthcare is, they'll say
So-
burnout, and they'll
Yeah,
say
now we're
burnout because we have to do.
Okay,
That's
so
why nuance
you-
is so
you
popular.
upload
Burnout because we have to do so
I have
much
it
stuff
running
on the
here,
computer,
so I
including
can
our
hear-
note taking.
You want to upload later? Can you do it?
Right.
You have to do the lab. If you do the lab, you'll get the package. that you
There was like a
have.
Saturday night, some comedy comedian that did that about
I've also
airline
installed it into,
tickets back in the day.
I've also installed it into Azure,
Oh, is it?
which is not part of the lab, but it's.
Oh, same.
But you can,
That's
you know, I can come here just to turn it on,
Okay.
It's crazy.
How do you replace the system that
Yeah,
keeps it
and now I can
lanes in here?
right, right,
something like,
yeah,
When there's no
please
competitors, they don't have.
find,
right.
uh,
And the same is true with the financial stuff, right? From my
So the
understanding is
sample
that
shows how
the
to
core of
do
the
it, right?
financial
Yeah.
system
Okay.
is still running on,
walk you through.
Except
uh,
connector,
you know,
except
main-
the graph connector.
COBOL.
Right.
yeah.
The graph connector you
Well,
can
and
do,
that's why.
but you need a developer tenant. You need a tenant where you're the admin.
Yeah.
And those, as an employee, I think the status of nuance.
No, no, I'm employed.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so I know that sometimes when we acquire companies, you
Oh.
don't get
They're all based on.
full everything right away.
Yeah, yeah.
Tenant.
So it,
Yeah.
because as an employee, you can sign up to get a Microsoft Visual Studio
Yeah.
subscription.
It's interesting that you talk about decentralization because I
Yeah,
spent a bit of time in blockchain as well. And
So,
I learned early on
from
I
there,
wasn't going to
you can
work
get
with me
your
because
own
it conflicted with my
Microsoft
career with
365.
Microsoft. Because whether folks want to admit it
Just
or
for
not,
testing.
they
And
just
from
don't go
there,
together,
can
you
do-
know.
You can be
And-
the
but
admin,
interestingly
know that you
enough,
can test the
how
stuff.
to-
I've noticed
get that
they got rid of the blockchain team a couple years ago, but they've just reintroduced what they're now calling Azure Ledger, which, if you look at it, is blockchain.
Blockchain's dirty word now because of crypto, and now it's all called smart contracts.
But here's where I'm going with this. I actually think AI might be a saving grace for
So if you sign into your
blockchain
digital
outside of
subscription.
Bitcoin. So I
Yeah,
think
I'm
Bitcoin's
saying-
already a
Oh.
clear winner or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But here's what I'm getting at.
And one of the
With
things
AI
you
now, and you know
get-
this because you've had to solve this at Microsoft, we have to worry about what's real and what's fake for the first time. And we have so much fake stuff all of a sudden with generative AI. That's literally what it does, is it
Well,
generates
the amount-
stuff.
Here, use your benefit.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
the thing,
yeah, I'm here.
the thing that scares me the most.
I'm here.
is the
Yeah, I know, I'm trying
functionality
to-
that's allowing us to create video
Okay,
content
my
and
Yeah.
audio content.
You stopped
Yeah.
recording, right?
Yeah.
Is that marketing renames
Wait.
everything?
Okay.
And then they change all the names to